President Trump was not elected to any office before he was elected president.
Sure.
And sometimes when you get a perspective outside of government, and I've been outside of government, I've been inside of government, sometimes when you get a perspective outside of government, you carry a perspective of the people into government, as opposed to being a career government official and looking at the world from that perspective. So I think that's what probably factored, at least partly into the decision by the president.
Bring us your unique perspective on energy coming from Alaska and what a Trump 2.0 would mean, because the Biden administration is reminding us on the daily that our output right now, we're pumping more oil and gas than ever in the history of the United States, yet there seems to be this idea that Trump would be friendlier to the energy sector than Joe Biden. What would in fact change?
I think he will. I think he'll be a lot friendlier.
Tell us specifically.
Well, I mean, President Biden has called for a moratorium on shipping gas overseas. That's not going to happen under President Trump.
So that's lifted immediately?
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of ANWR, which was the National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska on the North Slope, where there is oil and is gas, under the 2017 law that was passed, those leases went up for sale. The Biden administration illegally, and it is true, it's illegally, shut those leases down. That'd be lifted, I believe, under President Trump. And then taking up upwards of 13 million acres of NPRA, National Petroleum Reserve, off the table for oil and gas, I think that'll go back on the table. President Trump was the best president in the history of Alaska, from my perspective. When I came into office and I had my first meeting with President Trump, he said to me, "What can I do to help Alaska?" And that was every single meeting. And he probably did more than any other president in the history of the state. President Biden, under his administration, there are approximately 65 actions by the federal government against Alaska, taking land off the table for oil and gas exploration, closing down the Tongass National Forest, not going through with a land exchange to help some of our indigenous people in King Cove be able to get a road out so their people don't have to fight weather with airplanes. The list goes on and on and on. But under our president that we have right now, President Biden, 65 actions. That's more actions against a state than the federal government has against places like Iran. It's incredible.
If we could just continue the energy conversation for a moment longer, what we have heard a lot from Donald Trump and those close to him is this idea that it's just deregulation, unleash American energy, if you will. And he spoke a bit to that idea. But when we think about these oil and gas companies, which we're very familiar with here at Bloomberg, they have to be incentivized to actually spend their capital. Capital discipline has been the name of the game for years. It's about returning it to shareholders, not necessarily investing in new production in a world that is trying to transition to green energy. So beyond just deregulating, does more need to be done to incentivize these businesses to actually drill more in places like Alaska? If
we truly deregulate, that is going to save money. You won't have to spend as much money potentially on permitting and litigation. And to the concept of transition, I really believe that that concept disappeared several months ago. With the advent of new chips from NVIDIA, the Blackwell chip, the whole AI movement, you're going to need 3 to 6 times as much energy as you have now to power those server factories. So I think it's going to be additionality, not transition. You're going to see more discussion about additionality, more wind and solar, more oil and gas, more nuclear, more any type of energy possible. And I think the locales and the countries that win the energy war in that respect are going to win the supercomputing and the AI war too.
If you were the energy secretary, and you can respond to that as you want, how would you approach nuclear? This is something actually we talk about a lot on Bloomberg because of the incredible boom in data centers and AI and the massive amounts of power required. We're talking about now potentially opening data centers on the sites of nuclear power plants. Yes. What does the future hold for America and nuclear?
You know, nuclear has had a troubled past, and unfortunately, some of the press it's got, I think, is unwarranted. There's probably been fewer individuals killed or died as a result of nuclear accidents than almost any other type of energy put forward in terms of accidents. But if I were the energy secretary, and we're dreaming here for a moment, I would facilitate a consortium among states, among private industry, provinces in Canada, and maybe other countries to come up with a calendar, for example, on small nukes to say, how many small nukes can we get in the hopper to permit, to design, and to get a whole industry set up behind creating new nuclear facilities across the country. I think that's one of the things that the nuclear industry wants, is they want to know if we're going to begin a process of creating a whole new industry on small nukes, do we have the commitment to actually fund those nukes, pay for those nukes, and site those nukes in various places? So I think that would be a big step.
Governor, I just picked up on the words you used there. We're dreaming here. Are you saying that as another way to say we're speaking hypothetically, or because you actually do dream of being energy secretary?
No, no, no. That was hypothetical. I'm just saying for the moment here.
So if Donald Trump offered you that job?
Well, I'd have to have discussions with the president, but I'm looking forward to working with the president, helping the president, and moving this great country forward and Alaska forward.
Have you spoken with him since Saturday?
I spoke with his campaign folks, and I sent him a text. But I also understand that after such a traumatic moment,
sure,
the president's going to need to talk with his inner circle and his family more so than folks outside.
Did he respond? Was he texting over the weekend?
He was texting with some.
Yeah.
I got a text back immediately from the campaign chair, so we're in contact.
Yeah.
Well, as we continue to grapple with the aftermath of this weekend, pretty much every person we have talked to, elected official or otherwise, has talked about how the tone of this convention needs to be different as a result. Much more toned down rhetoric, a lowering of the temperature across the board, more of a message of unity. And I just wonder, given what you see in your state or just in your position as a governor, if you see an America that is truly capable of that right now, given how deeply rooted our divisions seem to be.
I do. I think what happened yesterday shook everyone to the core. I really do believe that. I was on the floor yesterday on the convention, and I did not pick up from anyone that there was a attitude or an atmosphere of vindictiveness or quote, going after folks. Quite the opposite. I think people were excited about the possibilities of another Trump administration coming in here November 5th. The discussions were very, I think, positive. And I'm an individual that doesn't really tolerate that type of talk, to be honest with you. I'm not part of that. Don't want to be part of that. And I think the country. I hope the country is at a point now where we start to focus more on policies as opposed to personalities.
Well, today's theme, crime and immigration. If there's any one of these 4 days where the rhetoric could get hot, where the red meat's going out the crowd, I presume it will be today. Do you agree?
Possibly. But I mean, those two topics, crime and immigration, I think are topics that are near and dear to most Americans' hearts. And we are a country of immigrants. But, I believe in a strong wall with many doors. I believe that we should have a strong wall in which we have immigration, in which we're bringing people into this country that want to be Americans, are going to contribute to America. Unfettered, wide open borders, I think, is a catastrophe for any sovereign in the world, especially this country. And in terms of crime, I think over the last couple of years, we've seen our cities burn. We've seen the homeless issue escalate. I think it's problematic, and I do think a change in administration will bring changes on the ground.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say this as the governor of Alaska, which is perhaps furthest removed from the southern border, at least in a physical sense, as any state can be. To what extent would you say this is the dominant thought of the people that you govern, or is it a different issue?
We are far away, but unfortunately for Alaska, we've had more deaths per capita through fentanyl than any other state in the country. And that fentanyl is coming through the southern border. So just that alone, if we can somehow impact that, affect that in a positive way to reduce that flow, is going to help Alaska. It's going to help every country in the United States, probably Hawaii as well, even though Hawaii is in the middle of the Pacific. But unfettered borders doesn't help anyone. And as I mentioned, in Alaska's case, the fentanyl coming over the border hurts us as well.
Is that so much a border issue, if I could ask you quickly, or is that actually a China issue at the root?
Probably a combination of both. But if you have a southern border in which there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people coming over, not checked, unfettered, getting into the country, and you have cartels in Mexico, it doesn't take a genius to put two and two together that you're going to have some drug problems.
It's really interesting to hear that that's a long journey from the southern border to Alaska. Talk to us about the path that it takes and the policy needed to stop this.
Just the same way it gets to Minnesota or Maine. You can drive to Alaska. You have to go through Canada. You can fly. You can mail it. You can take it on ships. These people are very creative. As a response to this, we just passed a bill that I signed a week before I came to the convention that increased the penalties for dealing drugs that result in a death to a second-degree murder charge. Because we have to get serious about this. Everybody knows somebody that has been impacted by drugs. Everybody knows somebody that knows somebody in which they may have had a loved one that overdosed on some of these drugs and cut short of very promising lives for these people. We've got to do something about it. The border is part of that solution. Discussions with China is part of that solution as well.
Of course, Senator JD Vance has a very personal history with drug abuse in his own family as well. He has talked about that openly. He did so again when discussing fentanyl in his first interview after being named the vice presidential nominee yesterday. As we consider policy that JD Vance is likely to adopt, we've been describing him as a populist, an isolationist, potentially just a newer, younger version of Donald Trump. How do you see your party changing as a Republican governor, as we are not just considering President Donald Trump, but potentially a Vice President JD Vance, who is very, very similar?
You know, I think, again, time will tell exactly what the new Vice President nominee is really thinking on some of these issues. I tend to know what President Trump is thinking on these issues. The changes that you're referring to the party, I don't know how big I don't know how large or big those changes are really going to be. I think there's going to be some nuances in implementation. I think there's going to be some emphasis on certain policy decisions, but I don't know how great a change. I mean, I think the Republican Party.
But this isn't Mitch McConnell's Republican Party anymore, really?
I think it's America's Republican Party. I think when Donald Trump came in, it became a party of the people as opposed to elected officials, politicos, oligarchs, et cetera.
There are 50,000 people here for this Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Most of them have never been to Alaska, and I'm guessing will never go. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to know about your state?
Well, from an economic standpoint, Alaska is part of the solution for America. We have the largest oil field in North America, conventional oil field in North America. We have over 100 trillion cubic feet of gas that can help America and our Asian allies. We have 49 of the 50 rare earths that could help the United States be strategically independent of China. We have 1/7 of the country's timber. We have some of the largest fishing ports in North America. No, we're a bastion of freedom. We're the only Republican state left on the West Coast. And we take our freedoms seriously. We're a Second Amendment state unlike any other. We have the highest per capita of retired veterans in the state of Alaska. We have admirals and generals that retire to the state of Alaska. And that we are the fort for Alaska. We're only 2.5 miles from Russia, 50 water miles from Russia. We have the Russians in our airspace that we chase out on a continual basis. We have the Chinese working their ships up through the Bering Strait. So we are a strategic part of this country.